So welcome back, everybody. This is the first of our full sessions at CAIS 2021. This is the session where we are recognizing our best paper award winners, and also we have an honorable mention being presented today. As you probably remember, my name is Adam Worrell. I am from the University of Alberta. I'm going to be moderating this session for us today. A brief note that we are recording these sessions, most of them. There are some presenters who have specifically requested, not in this session, but in other sessions, to not have the sessions recorded. Do note that we will be pausing the recording during the Q&A. So if you want to ask a question that you don't want to have recorded, you have the full ability to do that, and we won't be recording those parts of the presentations throughout the conference, but we will be recording most of the actual presentation. So if you're unable to stick around for a presentation, you should be able to see most of them posted on the CAIS website a little bit later on. But these are our best paper award winners, and we'd like to start with recognizing our best paper for the conference, which is a bibliometric analysis of race-related research in LIS by Philippe Mongeon, Alison Brown, Ratna Dhaliwal, Jessie Hill, and Amber Matthews. And I believe that Jessie is going to start us off here. So please take it away, Jessie.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm going to be presenting our work in progress, which is called a bibliometric analysis of race-related research in LIS. And my co-author, Philippe, is going to join us in a few minutes to share some of our results. Philippe and I worked on this study with Alison Brown and Ratna Dhaliwal from Dalhousie University, as well as Amber Matthews from Western University. I'm in the master's program at McGill. So on behalf of all of us, I will say it is a big honor to receive the Best Paper Award this year. This paper was an opportunity for us to kind of see how library and information science fits into the broader world around us. So we're excited to share some of what we found with you. So this paper was written in response to a call for papers by the journal Education for Information. They were doing a special issue on race relations and racial inequality in response to the protests against systemic racism going on around us. And the goal of this special issue was to ensure that our field is reflecting these social transformations in its literature. So for some background, we know that the library profession has been and still is extremely white. Surveys on the racial makeup of library staff in Canada over the past 10 years have shown that the profession is around 87% white. The figure shown here on this slide is from the largest survey of libraries in Canada, but other surveys have shown similar numbers across both public and academic libraries in Canada. So with our profession being so white, we can lack perspectives from librarians and scholars who identify as part of a racialized group. And ultimately, this reflects greater societal practices of marginalization where whiteness is centered as the status quo. Because LIS is a meta-discipline that covers pretty much every subject matter, we would expect to see research that considers race just as you'd expect to see this type of research in other fields that relate to our greater society as well. So the question we are asking then is how much attention is devoted to topics of race in our field? Our goal then with this project is to gather empirical evidence of the amount of attention paid towards race or racial inequality in LIS literature. We have 3 research questions. The first one is just, like I said, how much attention does race receive in LIS? Secondly, what trends can be identified in the share of race-related LIS research since 1980? And lastly, how has race-related research been distributed across the research sub-areas within LIS? So we're going to first identify what the sub-areas within LIS are, and then we're going to see where the race-relevant research lies within them. So our methods, to begin, we collected all LIS articles and reviews that are indexed in the Web of Science. Our Web of Science database had articles dating back to 1980. So for this very practical reason, we limited our search to the year 1980 and later. In total, we ended up with over 89,000 LIS publications spanning 163 journals. Our second step was to compile a list of terms related to racialized groups and racial injustice that would indicate whether any of the papers we collected considered race in any way. So to create this list of terms, we consulted some online glossaries, such as those provided by Racial Equity Tools and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, among others. The reason that we included terms for both racialized groups of people and racial injustice is so that we could capture literature that discusses racial inequality without mentioning any specific group of people. And likewise, so we can find literature that mentions a specific BIPOC community without discussing racial injustice, because obviously not every article about a racialized group is about racism. Basically, we attempted to capture all the literature that deals with racism, but also other literature that discusses other racialized perspectives that don't relate to racism. So once we had our list of terms, we tagged them to indicate whether the term related to a specific community of people, multiple communities, or non-specified racism or racial inequality. This was just so we could see the distribution of research topics. Next, we searched our set of LIS articles for any mention of our selected terms, and we manually validated the results to remove false positives. So for example, we searched for any mention of the acronym POC that would be used to indicate people of color, but POC is used in a whole bunch of other ways, like point of contact or proof of concept. So we had to eliminate all of those false positives. After validation, we had our group of race relevant publications left. We then built a citation network of all the LIS publications in the Web of Science to identify the main research sub-areas in the field. And then within each sub-area, we identified the race-relevant papers. So I'll turn it over to Philippe now to share some of our results.
All right, thank you very much, Jessie. So let's get into our results. We found 639 unique papers that mention at least one of the terms that we used. Some of the papers, of course, included more than one term and sometimes more than one term category. This is why the table here on the right that shows the number of papers per category actually sums up to more than 639. So there's 639 unique papers. And then we plotted this the share of race-related research in LIS over time to see what trend can be identified in our data set. So since 1980s, and we found, of course, as expected, some increase in the uptake of those terms, at least in the literature. So yes, there is an increase overall. It pretty much doubled since the 2000-2010. So that's, I suppose, a good thing. However, the overall share, if you look at the percentage on the left, is still at its peak around 2% of the LIS literature. But that's not that much. If you consider the specific communities that are discussed in this literature, there is a higher prevalence of research that looks at Black people, and we see some of that research already happening in the 80s and 90s, and it rapidly increases in the 2000s. There's also research mentioning indigenous communities, and that started really increasing only in the 2000s, and it seems to have peaked around its 2010 levels. So then we wanted to situate those papers within their broader LIS context. So to do that, we, as Jessie mentioned, we built a citation network of all LIS publications in Web of Science, and we applied the Louvain community detection algorithm to identify clusters or research area. And the labels that you see here were assigned by us based on the most frequent words in the titles and abstract of those papers. So of course, removing the stop words and using TF, IDF to identify more cluster-specific terms. So we just give these labels to try to understand what those colored dots are about broadly. So in this table, we have the number of LIS publications that are found within each of the clusters. The N is the number of race-related papers found within that cluster. And we also have that number represented as a percentage so that we can better compare between clusters. And the color code in the percentage column indicates how far from the average, so for all the clusters, how far from that average cluster is. So basically, race-related research is overrepresented in the green clusters and underrepresented in the red ones. And we see that librarianship, collection development, information literacy, knowledge organization are some of the hot areas where we're doing most of this race-related research. The last column on the table on the right is the average, average relative citation. So that's what ARC stands for, of the race-related publication. So a value lower than 1, that means that the papers about race in these clusters is cited less than average paper, LIS papers in these clusters. And conversely, above 1, so shades of green, indicates that they are more cited than the average of the group. So overall, we see that when we talk about race in LIS, we tend to be less cited than other papers in the field that do not talk about race. So that I think is an interesting, perhaps not so encouraging finding, but there are some exceptions, like the 7 papers is a small number in information retrieval and healthcare, where race-related research tends to get more cited than the average, which is encouraging. So we also looked at what fields of research are cited in the LIS literature overall, but also in our group of interest, so the BIPOC-related publications, just to see like what kind of knowledge they build upon, right? And it's of course a very broad overview. These are very broad fields, but it gives us an idea of how like that set of papers differs from the average paper in our field. So if we look at the blue and red lines here on the left, we see that there are different distribution across the 14. These are NSF disciplines. Where race-related publications, they tend to cite more professional fields, more health, more social science, more medicine and psychology than the average LIS paper. Right? And we cite much fewer engineering and technology, which might not be surprising. And on the right, we focus on that professional field, because what is professional field? It's where LIS is located in the NSF classification. So LIS is in there with a bunch of other things that are considered professional fields. And we see that if you look at those specifically, the race-related research cites more other LIS research, more education, more communication, more law, and much less management, which is, I think, interesting. So yeah, that was just another kind of insight that we can gain from knowledge that we can gain about that specific body of literature, and how we can compare it and see how it differs from the field in general. Moving on. So then, okay, we've been so far just comparing, looking at LIS in general, knowing that there's some race-related research here and there and how it differs from the average paper. Then we wanted to look at, okay, just that set of paper alone, what does it look like? So we zoomed in the race-related publication network. So we reproduced our process of making the citation network, clustering with the Louvain algorithm, identifying communities and labeling the communities. So that's what we obtained here. A little particularity with this network is the size of the nodes. You can see some are bigger than other. So the big nodes are just those that have more citation links with the other nodes on the network. So let's call them central papers. And what we did, and here you see just a little sample. So we can pull out those papers from the different groups. So we have the example here of the academic librarianship group and the information behavior group. So we can see what papers are actually in there. It gives us an idea of actually what research is happening, but I'm not going to go in more depth and looking at all the papers, but that gives you an idea of how this tool can be used to like sort of understand the literature and dig in and actually find interesting literature about an important topic. Okay, so that sums up what we found at this point. To summarize, we've seen that there's more research, there's an uptake of race-related issues in the LIS literature that is indexed in Web of Science. So that's, I guess, a positive thing, but it's still low enough in terms of percentage to suggest that racial considerations might still be largely ignored by the field. As we highlighted previously, race-related research is most common in librarianship and information behavior, information literacy, and knowledge management. That could be explained perhaps because these are areas that actually deal with the public, so that are confronted to those issues, that deal with these communities directly to some extent. So that might explain why there's more uptake in those specific sub-areas of the field. But there's also the increased focus on diverse ways of knowing, calls to decolonize classification systems, and integrate indigenous knowledge into our catalogs and our organization classification systems. So that also, I think, is that's why actually I think we get this knowledge management standing out. We also found out that racial considerations are minimal in the more technical sub areas, hence the lower number of references to engineering literature. Of course, that research may be dealing with race agnostic information technologies or system, but still this finding can still suggest an uncritical stance towards the status quo. And we know that technologies often contribute, nurture, even create inequalities, right? So I think that's something that we should not just dismiss as, oh, it's technology, it has nothing to do with race. As we know more and more, technology contributes to these social systems, and we need to look at that. We are already, but perhaps not. Is something that we pulled out of our findings. Of course, there's some limitations to a study like this. The first obvious one is the use of the Web of Science that has a limited coverage, especially in the arts and humanities and social science journals. So that gives us an incomplete view for sure. And they also limited the coverage of the types of documents that we can look at. So this is based on journal articles only, so they exclude books. So that's another limitation, obviously. And the way that we try to mitigate these limitations is by focusing on percentages and averages and using basically size-independent indicator, because raw numbers can be misleading. And we found 639 papers. This is certainly an underestimation of the number of papers that exist out there. But compared to the total number of LIS publications, we can get still a good indication. Another clear limitation comes from the methodological approach that we use. That it's not a typical methodology that we will use to discuss these issues. So, we use a bibliometric overview, and by nature, like, we're not digging in the publication. Right? We cannot really, or we could, but like at this point, we have not really dug out what is being said, what is being argued in those papers. So we provide an overview only. This digging in, of course, is desirable. It would require a different methodology. That might be something that we will pursue in the next stages of this research. Speaking of the next stages, first thing that we want to do is expand the literature beyond the Web of Science, so pulling from a more diverse set of sources so that we can get a better picture. I think it will also be interesting to expand to not just race-related issues, but also gender issues, and so considering the LGBTQ plus community and other EDI terms more broadly, if there's some things that we missed because we were focused on race in this paper. And I think one thing that where we want to take this is actually create a collection of papers that we can share with the community, possibly build a platform that will allow users to navigate the maps, such as the ones that we presented here, so that you can navigate and explore the literature. And I think that might be something interesting and useful for the community. And then, of course, there's expanding the scope of the study to go beyond LIS, and I think that's also part of our future. So that's it. I would like to thank you again for attending this presentation, and thank you for the award. That was unexpected and, of course, very much appreciated. If you have comments or questions, if you want to contribute to this research going forward, feel free to contact me at the email address listed here. And also thank you again to my fabulous team of colleagues who worked really hard at getting this paper together. So thank you again, and we look forward to your question and this discussion.